welcome and good morning, good afternoon, depending on where you are. My name is Brian Gifford. I'm the Research Director at the Integrated Benefits Institute, and I'm very pleased that you're joining me this morning for our IBI's presentation of our leave and disability benchmarking. This is one of IBI's core resources for our members. So I'm going to talk about IBI's basic business case for a healthy, high-performing workforce. And I'm going to then discuss specifically how absence, disability leaves, and job performance fits into that view. And I'll do that specifically with reference to IBI's disability and leave benchmarking program. I'll show you a little bit about the data itself, and then we'll jump into a demonstration of the online interface, which includes both the industry summary reports, which are the main benchmarking product, but also I'll show off some of the analytic capabilities by showing the database query tool. Again, our reports are one of the main benchmarking products that we have. Some of you may have already seen those. But the data that we get are really actually quite rich, and we can use those for any number of things. We've created a couple of tools for use for our members, but we also write reports out of these. So I'll be sharing a little bit of those, and then we'll open it up for Q&A so that people can get as deeply into this information as they would like. So a little bit about IBI. Clearly, you've all heard of IBI since you're on this webinar. But from IBI's perspective, we're a national nonprofit organization focused on workforce health and productivity. What that actually means is that we are the hub of a network of benefits professionals, consultants, VPs, managers, and directors of benefits, all of whom are looking at ways to help improve the health of their workforce and therefore improve the health of their business. And if we have a core message, it's that while everybody recognizes that illness has costs associated with it, we always try to emphasize that health actually creates value for organizations. And it does so in a really simple way. When IBI talks about healthy, high-performing workforce, we mean people who are healthy enough, feeling well, ready to work, ready to do a good job when they're on the job, and do all the things that people in fact hire them for. Okay, if they do that, then the company can do all the things it's supposed to do that make it a business, and they meet their final business objective. This is a really, really simple model. And in health and productivity, I find that we still don't always discuss our value proposition in this way. But this is a really flexible model, and it's applicable to just about any kind of organization you can think of. You can think of schools where the outcome is supposed to be, for example, children reading at grade level, children graduating on time. You can think of hospitals where people are getting good, high quality care. You can think of for-profit businesses that are selling things and making things. It's really a flexible way of looking at it. So ultimately, what we always want businesses to do, and what we hope businesses will start to do, is start thinking about the health of their workforce and linking it back to the kinds of metrics that they actually use to manage their own business. So if companies are really tightly focused in their human capital management systems on employee turnover, we always want them to think about, well, what role can a healthy workforce play in minimizing turnover? If customer satisfaction is the kinds of things that the CEO and the chief operating officer are really concerned about, that's where you should start thinking about your people strategy and how health can either make that more effective or illness can make that less effective, and so on. Now, again, these are really simple models. Every company has its own preferred business metrics, but there are reasons, perfectly good reasons, why a lot of companies don't put these things together, and that it can be really difficult. It can be really difficult to understand how a person who is adherent with their diabetes medications, for example, or their diabetes treatment plan that their doctor has put together, it's really difficult to show how that actually translated into a better supervisory evaluation and how showing more performance on the job actually increase customer satisfaction for a specific work unit, and how that finally flowed through into greater profitability. Business is hard. We all know that. Business analytics are hard. So in the absence of being able to pull all of this together, we focus in our field of health and productivity, and IBI is no different. We focus on absence and disability leaves. And if these metrics are a second best approach at health and productivity, they're still really quite good. They're good for any number of reasons, one of which is by the time we see somebody taking time off from work for illness, we know something really important about their health. Okay, so it's a lagging indicator. And we know something about how well they're being cared for. We all know that absences, lost work days, average daily wages, things like that are a key measure of productivity in an organization and larger. And so by using absence and disability, we really finally now have that bridge between people's health, how they're being cared for, productivity, and ultimately business performance. So again, it's not everything. And ultimately, we want companies to focus on the things that they actually use to measure how their business is being run. But in the meantime, you can make very powerful business cases using absence and disability leave. Okay. And that brings us to IBI's tools and resources. How do we actually, again, as an organization, focus on research, focus on education, focus on data and tools? How do we actually support that business proposition of the healthy workforce? And again, we try to get it, our tools and resources really try to get at four main questions in really broadly speaking. And of course, since we're talking about disability and leave benchmarking today, the most important question, or the central question for that program, is going to be, if I'm an employer and I offer short-term disability, long-term disability, and so on, or I'm thinking about doing it, I want to understand what is really a common set of outcomes for those kinds of programs for companies in my industry, perhaps of the same size as me. How are these programs performing? Okay. Now, again, we have any number of other important questions. If we wanted to look at programs discretely, we can do that with benchmarking. We can also pull them together for an organizational view. Once we've talked about illness and its impact on business, we haven't really said a lot. There's no management strategy for illness. There are management strategies and guidelines for specific kinds of conditions. But again, our benchmarking data actually feed into a lot of these different products that IBI actually focuses on. So finally, this issue of what can an employer do about any of this, for the longest time, and I won't say much about the medication adherence savings calculator. It is out on IBI's website. But again, think of IBI's position as the hub of this network out in the market, connecting employers, suppliers, experts throughout the field. When we start thinking about what employers can do to try to manage health and productivity in their workforce, understand that our data and tools really make the basic business case. And we depend on experts out in the field to come up with these solutions, either business to business in terms of employers communicating with one another, or employers working with their partners. Okay, but IBI is, excuse me, the benchmarking system is central to quite a few things that we do. So let's now really get into details. When I talk about disability and leave benchmarking, think of this as a really large data set that reflects what goes on out there in the market for disability and absence management. Essentially what happens is there are, I think at this point, 17 companies that actually provide their books of business for different kinds of programs to IBI. And think about why they might do this. IBI has been benchmarking since about 2007. And at the time we put this program together, competitors out there in the market wanted to know what's going on for the market at large, not just in their book of business. But they are competitors and they don't really want to share their information with one another. That's perfectly reasonable. So if they don't trust each other with their information, they do trust IBI with their information. So for about the last 12 years, we've been collecting claims data from and leave data from 17 different organizations, tens of thousands of employers' disability policies, millions and millions of claims. Okay. And the information we've been getting include claims from employer-based or employer-sponsored disability policies for short-term disability and for long-term disability, for companies that are having their Family Medical Leave Act leaves managed by a third party, and for workers' compensation. Okay, so we get all the data from these providers, again, tens of thousands of employer policies, and we use that to create industry-level reports to answer any number of questions. Some of these are really basic around the incidence rate, so how many claims can we expect to see for a company in a specific industry? How long is the average leave? Of course, that's the productivity loss component. That's going to drive a lot of the costs. What are the reasons that people tend to take on leave? If we're talking about short-term disability and long-term disability, it can be diagnosis. If we're talking about Family Medical Leave Act, it can be really basic reasons for leave. For example, bonding with a new child, caring for a family member, an employee's own health reason. And finally, when we think about employers, we think about the financial costs of leave, particularly the wage replacement rates, if it's a paid leave, but also if it's a workers' comp leave, medical and pharmacy costs, other kinds of costs, legal costs, and so on. And in some respects, we also want to talk about how do claims end. So if we're talking about short-term disability, how many people are going to the end of their benefits eligibility? How many are going into the long-term disability system? If it's a long-term disability system, how many people are coming back to work? How many people are gone for 2 years, in which case they're probably a good candidate for Social Security disability insurance? And then finally, how many of them actually do end up in the Social Security disability system? So we get a lot of information out of what is a really basic set of reporting claims, just to answer those kinds of questions. But we can also answer these kinds of questions across and within different kinds of industries. We can look at plan design where it's applicable, for example, in short-term disability and long-term disability. We can also look by company size, self and fully insured designations. I've already talked about looking across diagnoses, but we can also look at claim outcomes depending on the claimant's work state. And we can also split it up by age and sex. So it's quite a robust data set in terms of what it contains. It's also robust in terms of how much data there actually is. And so 2018, we're always about a year behind in terms of benchmarking. We want all of the data providers to have an adequate opportunity to fully finish off their books for the prior calendar year. But 2018 is, just in terms of the volume, the largest data set we've ever had. So for example, we are looking at this year, 2 million short-term disability claims across over 40,000 employer policies, 60,000 long-term disability policies, family medical leave, quite a few leaves this year, 2 million. I don't think we've ever had more than 1.4, 1.5 million claims. And since we're always collecting 5 years worth of information on workers' comp, we have almost 5 million claims this year, reporting through 2012, I believe, through 2018. Okay, so it's quite a bit of information. I've told you a little bit about what is contained in each one of these claims so that we can start looking at lost work time, looking at wage replacement costs, and across all of these different characteristics of employers and in characteristics of employees. Okay, so we have all of that data that we pulled together. And again, what we really pull this together for, the most basic use and the most important use of these data are to produce industry reports. So again, if you are using IBI's benchmarking reports, if you use them in the past, you've probably used our industry summary reports. We have a downloadable interface, and I'll show you that in just a moment. But again, what it really emphasizes is that for the different kinds of programs that we offer, selecting an industry is really just as simple as knowing the standard industrial classification code, the industry code, knowing where that is, and we have some helpers on our website so that you can find that if you don't know. Downloading the report, and then really just checking a company's experience against what we would consider to be the industry norms. And I've already told you a little bit about the kinds of questions that these industry reports address. And so, for example, if we're talking about the incidence rate, we want to know, what are companies really seeing out there in terms of every year, how many new disability claims, if this is short-term disability, for example, how many new short-term disability claims can we expect to see for every 100 people who are covered for benefits? Okay? And we always try to give the entire distribution that we see. Most people are going to want to look right at that group average or the arithmetic mean. And so we can tell from this industry that your average company is going to see about 6.1 leaves per 100 covered lives. So about 6% of the workforce is going to go on leave in any given year. We know that that is probably skewed a little bit by some companies with a really large volume of leaves, higher than average. It drags up the average, of course. So we might want to orient we might want to orient towards, well, what do we expect to be the normal outcome? And I would say that a good measure of that might be 3 different statistics we're showing here. One is the median, the number at which 50% of the employers in this data set are above and 50% are below. That's about 5.1. So as opposed to the average employer, the typical employer is about 5 new claims per 100 covered lives. You can also think about the terms of what is the, quote, normal range. I would say that's probably between the 25th percentile and the 75th percentile. Okay, that's really a good approximation of where most 50% of companies are going to lie. And this becomes a really useful piece of information to have. Because if your organization, if you know your own incidence rate, and you're closer to 7.8 new claims per 100 covered lives, you know that it's feasible to bring that down somehow, or to see it come down to 2.8, to the 25th percentile. Okay. And if you know you're somewhere close to the 25th percentile, you have a really low incidence rate. Congratulations, keep up the good work, and you can start prioritizing your disability management efforts elsewhere. For example, to the lost work time durations. So lost work days per claim in this example are about, the average company experience about 39, not the average company, but the average claim pays people on about 39 days for the entire time that they're absent, not including the elimination period. Okay. The median's about 28. So again, you start to get a good sense if you know your own experience, if you know that your average is somewhere around 39, you know that there's work that can still be done. Okay. And the normal range is about 12 days to 50 days. Okay. So it starts to give you a really good sense of where you should think about what are your disability management strategies going to be. Are they going to be emphasizing preventing claims? Well, you always want to do that. But of course, if you're already pretty low on the incidence rate, you may want to shift some of the effort towards managing the duration or managing the return to work when somebody actually has to go out on leave. Okay. We also include payments per closed claim. This oftentimes is where people really want to drive the conversation. But if we're talking about short-term disability or long-term disability, really this is going to be reflective of duration, at least at some level. Yes, there are differences in companies by what they pay people. There are differences in the wage replacement rate. But really, this is a shorthand to help us understand the financial impact for employers. Okay. So again, the three main questions: how many leaves can we expect? How long do we expect to be without the services of an employee, and how many days are we going to pay them, and the total financial impact. That's really the most basic use of the benchmarking reports. Okay. But we also include a lot of other information. And so, for example, if we're talking about short-term disability, we can look at some of the drivers of different leaves. So we can split or every report in short-term disability and long-term disability. Includes outcomes for different kinds of conditions. This can be really useful for companies who are potentially dealing with more uncommon issues. And so one of the things I often hear from employers is we seem to have quite a few claims for mental or behavioral health conditions. Well, you can check that using these data. You can take your industry report and understand that the average claims experience is about 6% mental health disorders. Okay, and of course the average payments are a little bit higher than 6%. And what that tells us immediately is mental health claims, behavioral health claims tend to be quite expensive. And you can get a really quick shorthand on that without even doing the arithmetic between 7.95% and 6.32%. You can just look at, for example, a closed mental health claim. The average payments are about $6,000. Lost work days are about 45 days. Compare that to other kinds of conditions such as neoplasms, which are expensive not just in their healthcare spend, but also in the disability impact in terms of payments. Okay. So you start to, again, prioritize where am I going to put my care management efforts, where am I going to put my employee assistance efforts, understanding that different kinds of conditions are driving what's going on in my book of business. Okay, so we can start taking the conversation deeper than just what most companies know, which is musculoskeletal and pregnancy are a large part of the claims. But in this case, that's really not a great excuse to focus exclusively on managing those kinds of conditions. There are many other things to take into account. We can say more about plan design. We can say more about going deeper for example, family medical leave on state level outcomes. But at this point, it's probably time to just start going to the online demo and show you the interface. So this is what IBI's benchmarking system really looks like from the standpoint of a user. And most users, if you've used this before, or if your membership gives you direct access to these kinds of reports, you might have used these in any case. We'll always keep 3 years of information out there. We're going to stick with 2018 in this case. Okay. So we'll take the 2018 summaries. I'm going to focus on long-term disability because we haven't talked too much about that. We haven't shown much about that yet. And we can start to build out our industry that we want to look at. So I'm going to, in this case, I'm going to go for the ever popular hospitals and build up all the different services industry. Now I know that hospitals rolls up to services, that kind of industries, but just to give you a taste of how many different reports we can come up with, we can show you 164 long-term disability report options, industry options in the services alone. And I know that hospitals roll up to 806. Again, IBI has been benchmarking for quite a long time. That's how I learned these things. And we'll just look at hospitals generally. So not general medical and surgical hospitals, not psychiatric hospitals, not specialty hospitals. We'll roll it all up together just to hospitals for this example. And what we're going to see, again, is a more detailed version of what I've already showed. In a PDF format. You can also get these in a CSV format if you want to work with the numbers in Excel. I find that they're a lot easier to see and understand in the PDF report, at least at first. So again, it really gives you the basics of the information. I showed you short-term disability before. Here we have the long-term disability options, and we really want to focus in on the kinds of incidents that are going to be what IBI hears as most value out there in the field. So new claims per 1,000 covered lives, per 1,000 covered lives in this case, not 100 for long-term disability. Again, the normal range is something around 0. There are a lot of policies that don't see any long-term disability claims. The 75th percentile is about 5.8. So somewhere between 5.8 and 0 is probably where most companies are going to find themselves. And if you're at 0, carry on, keep doing great work. If you are closer to the 5.8, you know that it's reasonable to get down at least to 2.5. That's quite a spread. But that some companies are finding themselves in around 6.5. Okay. Active claims, claims that are actively being managed, we can get information on that. We don't have information for long-term disability on durations. It's a real difficult trick, but we do know how many people are actually coming back to work if they have been out for 2 years or more. So claimants returning to work is a percentage of closed claims, less than 24 months old. That's a mouthful. I prefer to go straight to claims for which SSDI was awarded. That gives you a good sense of how many people are probably not going to come back to the workforce at all, at least in terms of everything that people have learned over their career, all their experience, all their institutional knowledge is probably gone. 53%. What can we say about that, except that there are ways to manage that down as well. And finally, this issue of return to work. How many people in the return to work, how many people are actually coming back of all the closed claims? It's not bad. 1 in 3 people are actually able to come back to work. Your company might have different results. And one thing you should understand as well, I haven't emphasized this as much, is the depth of information that we have for a lot of industries. And so, for example, when we are looking at our incidence rates, we're looking at over 1,000 employers have the data that we need to contribute to that. When we are looking at payments for closed claims, we're getting about 1,500 employers who are able to contribute that information. We're looking at 14,000 closed claims for long-term disability. I talked a little bit about plan type. Plan type is a little complicated with long-term disability. Actually, it's not as complicated as it seems. There are really only 2 different kinds of elimination periods, 180 days or 90 days. So if you know something about your own policy, and you should, of course, but if you're dealing with, for example, a client, you know something about their policy, you really can find their elimination period. You can find their wage replacement rate, at least within the range, and figure out what we would expect to be in terms of once a claim occurs, how much is it going to cost? What are the chances that it's going into long-term disability system? What are the chances they're going to return to work, and so on. So quite a bit of information just in these basic industry reports. Okay. I also told you about the the database query tool. And database query tool right now, the most current year is 2017. We ought to have 2018 loaded in a couple of weeks. But what this really does, it gives you the opportunity, one, to make a much, quite frankly, a quite slimmer report. So we can zero it down, for example, if we're looking at short-term disability, just to the metrics that we want to look at. But we can also do something in terms of covered lives if we're talking about incidence rates. So I may be only concerned with hospitals that are on the larger side, and I think most hospitals will be. I'll select my hospital industry. The interface is a little nicer, quite frankly. I can go straight to the health services instead of having to scroll through lots of different lists. Pick hospitals, and we're on our way. Now, what is actually going on is, whereas the PDF reports, the industry reports are actually all completed and ready to go when you get them, database query is actually calculating new results every time and repackaging it in a familiar and tasty format. So if we're just looking at short-term disability, how many claims can I expect to see for hospitals that are at least 1,000 people? We know again that the typical normal range for hospitals is between 6.5 and 11.9. We know that the median is about 9.3. That's for active claims, excuse me. And so again, if we know our own outcomes, we know our experience is closer to 11.9. We know that it's feasible to get down to 6.5. I mean, 25% of companies are at least that low. And we can start setting up our own priorities for putting in place systems that can help keep people off of disability. And again, that's for incidence rates. A much deeper set of variables or characteristics that we can stratify if we're looking at the claims outcomes. So we might want to look at lost work days per claim, payments per claim. I'm interested not just in hospitals, for example, but hospitals of specific size. Number of covered lives is our proxy for size. And I'm interested not just in hospitals of a certain size, I'm interested in hospitals in California and Nevada and Oregon. Okay. We could pick by condition, but right now let's just stick with, how about a plan type? Let's look at our different plan design options. I'm interested in 1 week elimination period, 6-month maximum benefit duration. And again, it'll go through, it's gonna find all the claims information in the background, package it up nicely. I don't have enough information. Well, you also understand that we have a robustness check behind all of this. And I have over-filtered the information here. But we won't report any metrics unless we actually have a sizable number of employers. We want people to only have good, high quality information. So I can at least start scaling it back. And one of these filters is in fact taking away a lot of the power of my report. It can be any of them. This is the point at which having a playful attitude towards data comes in handy. We'll try a few things. So I can't tell you about a specific plan design for claims coming from hospitals in California, Nevada, and Oregon, from large size hospitals. But for all plan designs, I can tell you something that may be quite useful. So again, in this Pacific Northwest region, we would expect to see the average claim costing about $4,300. Your results may vary. In fact, they're most likely somewhere between 493 and 4,814, typically congealing or converging around 1,600. And again, this is driven by lost work days, by days that are actually paid. And you know, the same approach. So again, when you find yourself at the higher end, you know that there's room to improve. When you find yourself at the lower end, keep up the good work. Find out what's working and why it's working, and see if you can apply those lessons to other benefits that you offer, family medical leave, for example. Okay. That's really a high-level overview of what we have in the industry summary reports. But again, I talked a little bit more about the richness of the data, and I showed you quite a bit of it in terms of the database query. All the different ways we can filter and cut these data so that when you are looking at your own organization, or when you're looking at a client's outcomes, you're really showing them a case that is as close to reality or as close to being relevant for them as is possible. Now, a couple of the things I showed, the incidence rate for short-term disability, for example, and the lost work days for short-term disability. Those can be used to answer the questions directly of how many lost work days do I think I'm going to have to deal with for my entire claims volume. And this can be really important, of course, for financial planning. You know what the costs are going, if you know something about what the costs are going to be. You know something about how many resources you're going to have to put aside to help manage people come back, or help people come back to work from a disability incidence, and so on. But I also told you that while the industry summaries can tell us something about the average costs, they can't really tell us much about the components of the costs. And they can't tell us anything without doing a lot of extra steps about the overall costs and the priority we should put on short-term disability versus long-term disability, for example. It can all be done with those reports. And for a while, IBI used to do this for people, or at least try to coach them through it. And finally, we just built an entire model of it that we call the full cost estimator. So the full cost estimator, what we've tried to do is we've tried to make a scalable model for any IBI member company to use, where we are going to take the core of the benchmarking data, lost work days, incidence rate, and let people model their own wage replacements, wages that they pay for a company of their size in their industry, and come up with their own high-level costs, okay, for the entire organization relative to one another. We didn't want to stop there, so we went out and found the best information we could about sick days from the National Health Interview Survey, which comes from the CDC, and about presenteeism, right? Impaired performance for people who have chronic health issues from the Workforce Health and Productivity Questionnaire designed by the Harvard Medical School and the World Health Organization. And we use those to put together a really basic model that people can then modify to meet their own benefits policies. And so, for example, if we wanted to stick with hospitals, now we're in the NAICS system. It's an offline conversation of why we do that. This tool, it's an online tool. It's available for all IBI members. I won't go too far into it unless we have a little more time. But it's the same approach. You find the industry that you want to use, 622 for hospitals. You put in your head count. How many companies do you actually have? And you can modify any number of things that are actually going to impact the overall experience of lost work time, but also the cost of lost work time. And the nice thing, or one of the things that I particularly like about this tool, is you'll not only get benchmarks, but you get benchmarks within benchmarks. So when you've selected 622 and you see 85% of employees in hospitals are full-time, that comes from the Bureau of Labor Statistics. When you find that 50% of hospital employees are eligible for short-term disability benefits, it might be different than your firm, but you understand at least that the average or the average hospital worker, half of them have short-term disability benefits, half of them don't. And that's, of course, going to impact the total cost and the total experience or short-term disability experience, okay? So to me, this tool is really, it's benchmarks, but it's benchmarks plus. It gives you an opportunity to create a use case that is very much like your own organization in terms of the different kinds of policies that are going to impact outcomes, okay? And what does the FCE give you? It'll give you the full roll-up for sick days, short-term disability, long-term disability, FMLA, workers' comp, and presenteeism, days equivalent for people with chronic health conditions, their impaired performance on the job. And again, it's going to help you set priorities for what's really driving illness-related lost work time. Okay. And we also roll up the costs. And again, this is where being able to adjust for your company's wage replacement rate for disability, or for short-term disability, long-term disability, the proportion of people who are actually eligible, and very critically, your salary band or your average wages for your company. This is where it's going to be really important and really give you a good understanding of what's going on in your company. And again, benchmarks within benchmarks. So for every different kind of way that illness can impose costs on your business, we tell you how we came up with that number. So for example, the workers' comp results, we'll tell you that according to OSHA, from our model, we would expect there to be about 572 active claims with lost work days, about 595 without lost work days. This is for hospitals. Okay. We'll run you up the total average days. We'll also give you a couple of different ways to talk about lost work time. We know when you're talking, well, we always assume when you're talking to the CFO, costs are going to be paramount. When you're talking to operations people, of course, how many full-time equivalents are you carrying, paying them, and they're not doing work? It's the equivalent of 77 missing employees who are being paid. Okay. We'll tell you about the benefits cost per day, and we'll roll it up to all of the different cost components of workers' comp. So wage and benefits, workers' comp medical, workers' comp pharmacy, all the other kinds of costs, legal costs, and this idea of opportunity costs as well. Okay. Opportunity costs are really, it's really a way of capturing all of the things that you cannot do because you are spending money on people who are, or you're losing money, losing sales, losing revenues, hiring replacements who may or may not be the same quality as people who are absent. There's a cost to all of that, and we try to model it. And we let you adjust all these different components as well, at least at the policy level. Okay. So the full cost estimator, again, available to all employers. It's probably one of the most technical, and quite frankly, I think one of the most elegant uses of the benchmarking data. It really gets at what most people are trying to accomplish when they're trying to get a handle on what's going on in their workforce so that they can start developing strategies towards minimizing the lost productivity impact of illness on their operations. Now, again, with benchmarking, it's a really high level model of what is actually possible with the disability data. We also use this information for different kinds of research projects, or really analytic projects. And the way benchmarking analytics reports usually come out is we have a member who sends an email directly. We don't have a channel for this yet, but it still works pretty well. And they say, I saw this, or I'm curious about that. We think what they're asking is sufficiently important to the field and would probably be of value to other members. So we'll try to do maybe a deeper dive on the information. And so, for example, a recent one we did, someone asked, in light of a report about a public-private partnership for different kinds of cancers, what actually goes on right now in terms of disability leaves for these kinds of cancers that are being focused on by this group in San Francisco. Okay. Well, we had that information. So we were able to say, for the 5 different kinds of cancers that this group was thinking about, plus other kinds of cancers, plus non-cancers, we were able to pull together using just the benchmarking data. What do we expect to see in terms of claims costs for liver cancer, lung cancer, colorectal cancer, breast cancer, prostate cancer, relative to other things? So we were able to read directly out of the average short-term disability claims costs and the risk-adjusted long-term disability claims costs. When by risk-adjusted, I mean what percentage of people going from short-term disability are going to go into the long-term disability system, okay, and give the weighted average for that. Okay. And again, I think I've talked about each and every one of these components already, just in the industry summary reports. So pulling together that kind of information, you can do some really powerful analytics with it, and we've done that. We like this report so much that we actually took the approach and created an online tool. Again, right now it's in beta, but it's available for users. This is what the short-term disability system looks like. We call it the Disability Diagnosis Analyzer. We are open to suggestions about better names, but this is a beta tool, so there's still time for you. But this is what the disability world looks like. Each one of these bubbles is a really deep diagnosis for different kinds of claims. The larger the bubble, the more claims. The darker, more intense color, the higher the cost of the claims. And of course, costs are going to be related to how long people are off the job. So again, We can zero in on everything if we want. We can filter down to specific kinds of conditions. We can drill down to specific kinds of groups. If we wanted to look at just the neoplasms, for example, that I already showed you from that report, here are all the different kinds of neoplasms. Here's where they are relative to every other kind of condition. They tend to be darker, i.e. more expensive than other kinds of conditions. But we can also start zeroing in on what these bubbles actually represent. So for example, let's just use colorectal cancer as just one example. We expect, IBI models up that there would be about 11,000 new short-term disability claims in the US for colorectal cancer. And the payments for those from start to finish are going to be about $8,000. I've talked a little bit about opportunity costs, so understand that $8,000 is the financial cost. The economic cost is probably much greater. Okay? Because again, they're going to roll into long-term disability, probably be lost to the workforce. All of the value that people bring every day in terms of their experience, in terms of their training, in terms of their leadership development, that's all lost. Story for another day. Okay. Another tool we developed based directly on the benchmarking data was a map that shows you state by state different kinds of leaves that are taken under the Family Medical Leave Act system. And so the intent of this, of course, was to try to get a handle on paid family leave laws that may be coming online and have come online in 2019 and maybe beyond. So again, we are able to, this is also available for members online. We're able to really take a look at what's going on in different kinds of states. I'm only showing you one view of the map itself that shows you the percentage of claims for bonding, the percentage of claims for family leaves and for own health leaves. But get online, take a look at the tool. It also shows, for example, the durations of Family Medical Leave Act. There's no cost component to Family Medical Leave Act, but I just showed you in the full cost estimator that we can assign an economic value to it. Again, people are off the job, they're gone for all day, just because it's, quote, unpaid leave, and it's not unpaid in California, in Hawaii, in Rhode Island, in New Jersey. Just because it's unpaid does not mean it's free. So that's a really high level overview of some of the things that we have tried to do with the disability benchmarking data. And again, starting from just that overall high level industry summary, where you can answer these basic questions about how am I doing, all the way through to what do we really expect to see at this global view. Okay. Now there's a Q&A function at the bottom at the bottom of the toolbar if you want to ask any questions. The first question, and I like this one a lot. First question is, can I distribute a listing / cheat sheet for the NAICS SIC codes that are in your database? Absolutely. Absolutely. I will, at the end of this webinar, I'll circulate a, excuse me, I'll circulate the, all of the resources that are available that I've showed you today. So what you'll get are the direct links to the IBI benchmarking tool, the direct links to the FMLA map, the direct links to the disability diagnosis analyzer, understanding that that's in beta. And that's the next question. Wonderful. Is the beta disability diagnosis analyzer available now? Yes, it is. It's available for use. What we really like to do is have people use it. It is not hitting the claims directly. It's hitting summary of the claims. So we'll put that out there. I'll direct you to it. And we're looking for other use cases. We would like people to take a look at it, find out some of the conditions that they are interested in, but also groups of conditions. And maybe feedback that information to how did the tool actually work? Was it actually useful for your needs? What could IBI do to make it better? We hope to roll out any number of these tools in a brand new user-friendly, interactive, and visually intensive platform in 2020. So we love the industry summary reports. We don't plan on changing them. But we know that there's a lot more that can still be done with this kind of information in terms of disability and leave dashboards, in terms of being able to drill down a lot more tightly on some of the kinds of conditions. And the disability diagnosis analyzer is just one example of that. We don't have any questions right now. I gave you a lot of information and I gave it to you at a really high level. What I recommend now is that you can go out and try some of the tools and see what you think, and send questions directly to me. Before I let you go, there's one more question. Is this platform integrated with Salesforce or the Einstein Analytics platform? It is not. It is not. And if I get the question right, one of the things that I will mention about the benchmarking data is go back to almost the first slide I talked about. Our data suppliers, they want the data to be secure and they want it to be safe. So IBI is not aware of which companies are actually, or which employers are actually in the data set. That's all blinded to us. And thank goodness for that, because we try to keep this as accessible and make it as public as we can. And if I get the questioner's meaning right, if this was integrated into what's actually going on, then we would really want, the interest there is, Coke wants to, I'm just going to pick on some companies. Coke wants to benchmark itself against Pepsi, and we understand that. But we don't want to know Coke's results compared to Pepsi's. So I hope that answered the question. I hope that's what you were getting at. The short answer is no. This is not integrated into any other kind of platform. But since I have a few more minutes left, I talked a little bit about benchmarking analytics. We have been able to use these kinds of data to answer really deep questions in partnership with the data suppliers, for example, about return to work strategies. And companies that have return to work strategies, if we survey their benefits managers, and we have, can we, with some assistance, link that back to the outcomes that their disability program sees? So we were able to coordinate that kind of research without IBI ever learning who was a company. Link their survey responses about the return to work programs to our data, and show that over time, return to work programs can bend the curve. So if you have really high disability durations and short-term disability, for example, having different kinds of return to work programs can help that year-over-year growth be a little bit slower than what it might otherwise be. So I'm always surprised and pleasantly surprised to find new use cases for these data, which again, going back to their origin, are really collected for that very simple use case of how is my short-term disability program performing compared to my peers in my industry. Well, that's, I think, sufficient for now. Again, please use the benchmarking reports. Use them, try them out, see if they answer your questions. Check out some of our analytics products, and check out our tools. And we'll be circulating resources around to help really guide you to these resources. So thank you very much for joining today, and I look forward to hearing from you in the future.